Welcome everybody to the mini geology radio show. This is KPFT HD2 channel in Houston, Texas. This is Daniel Minizini with the mini geology radio show where we put in connection every week our beloved discipline of geology and society at large. So today with us we have Jory Pacht, which is a CEO of Strandline Energy. Jory, welcome to Mini Geology Show.
Thank you.
Jory, you founded since 1992 6 oil and gas companies. Is that right?
6, including Strandline, yes.
All right. And I know that you like to reach out to the society at large. That is one of the main reasons why we are so glad that you are here with us to talk from your point of view of a founder of several companies, oil and gas companies, and talk about energy. I see that you visit some of the local associations and the universities to talk about what you call Energy 101. But I see that you are an entrepreneur and you have your successful company. So the very first question is, why do you do this kind of outreach?
Well, basically to give back to the community. I'm 68 years old. I'm not going to, I'm still working independently just because I enjoy it. But I think that there's a tremendous need for more energy education. I'm particularly glad to be speaking to listeners at KPFT because they're a progressive community. And quite frankly, I come from the other side of the tracks. And right now, we're doing a lot of yelling and screaming at each other when we should be talking to each other and coming up with solutions. Anthropogenic global warming is real. There's no question about that. There's no doubt about that. The scientific data is overwhelming. But what is also a reality are the great benefits of cheap energy that everybody, regardless of political viewpoint, takes for granted. And there is this kind of fantasy out there. All it takes is political will. We can snap our fingers. We can move immediately away from fossil fuels into solar and wind, and everything will be great. Unfortunately, things are more complex. And interestingly enough, efforts to move too quickly away from fossil fuels has not only increased the cost of energy, but it's also increased CO2 emissions. And I can go through those as we go through the interview.
So thanks for setting the stage. We're going to talk about this transition from fossil fuels to other forms of energy and the coexistence of several forms of energy. And I appreciate that you clarified what is your position, both politically and professionally. That is going to help the audience to understand and perceive what you say. But before going into the details of this Energy 101, I would like to talk with you and allow the audience to understand who are you, where do you come from, what are your ideas. So first of all, Jory, are you a geologist?
I'm a geologist. I got a PhD in geology in 1980 at Ohio State University. And all my life I wanted to be a professor. And I actually was a professor. I spent a short time as an assistant professor of geology at Kent State University. I realized fairly quickly that that was not a lifestyle that was for me, and I joined Arc Oil and Gas Geoscience Research Group.
What was the lifestyle that you didn't like?
Well, I'll say money, but it really wasn't money that I was earning. Okay, I was trying to set up a research program. And in Kent, Ohio is a small little town. There's just not a lot of research funds available to do geologic analysis. So, I started calling about various institutions to try to get funding. And the chairman of the department gave me a hard time for making long distance phone calls. Now, I don't blame the chairman a bit, though Kent State was in dire financial straits at that time. And this is back in the days, many of your listeners may not remember, but you actually had to pay to make long distance phone calls. But I very quickly realized I couldn't do the kind of science I wanted at Kent State. And there were tremendous opportunities to do that same kind of science at a much larger scale and a much more efficient scale in an oil and gas research company.
What was the kind of science you would have liked to do?
Basically, what we now call sequence stratigraphy, but what we then call seismic stratigraphy, using seismic data to understand the ways in which rocks were deposited.
And then, so you moved to industry. So I'm curious to understand, beyond the knowledge of geology, what else do you need as a person, as a professional, to launch your own company and be successful like you have been?
This is going to sound kind of touchy-feely, but one of the things I recognized when I started my own company is I had to get better at people skills. Being a researcher, you can kind of be that crazy guy that sits in the lab all by himself and comes up with great things. But to start a company, you have to establish professional and business contacts. And since my first company was essentially a service company, I was marketing geologic and geoscience skills to the industry at large. I learned how to be a salesman. And most people, when they think of a salesman, they think of the used car guy. Hey, what's it going to take to get you in a car today? Kind of slimy. That may work for selling cars, but it doesn't work for selling large projects or for selling ideas. You have to make friends with people.
Jory, tell us more about these contacts, the importance of contacts, the networking you're talking about, making friends with people. Tell us more about this.
Well, one of the things I did, I took advice from a friend of mine who had been a salesman. And what he said, Jory, as soon as you walk into somebody's office, notice anything personal, then immediately leave and write it down. So what I would do is that if I walked in to talk to somebody, I might see a picture of his daughter in a soccer uniform, or a picture of his son with his black belt in karate. And so I would immediately write that down. Then when I came back to visit this guy, I'd ask him, well, how's your daughter doing in soccer? And they'd be amazed at my great memory. But what it was kind of paying attention to details of people and really trying, instead of to sell a product, to answer a question. Okay, what is it they want? And am I the one, to answer their question? And in order to do that, it's interesting that a good salesman is commonly a good listener. Nobody really believes that because you think of the used car guy. But if I'm not listening, I don't know what the problem is I'm supposed to solve. I might be out trying to sell a service, that they flat don't want.
So can I translate that when you say that in order to have a business like yours, when you say that you need to make friends, it means that you need to establish trust.
Correct. That's a very, very a better way of saying it than I said it. Trust is extremely important and often misunderstood by a lot of people who are not in business and who are not entrepreneurs. People do business with their friends. And when I had my first company, we did a lot of international work. When I sold that company, I had 35 geoscientists working in 7 countries. Now, what's interesting is in a lot of those countries, they don't have a reliable legal system. So there, it's even more so about trust. So you don't just you just walk in and say, hey, hire my sedimentologist. You know, you basically develop a friendship, and that the development of that friendship might take a couple months. But once you develop that friendship, you're going to be the only one they want to work with because you're the only one they trust.
In these decades, from the 90s to now, the new decade of the 20s, what what you know now as a senior professional that you couldn't have seen when you were a youngster and you started working in the 90s?
Uh, Basically, one of the things that happens to a lot of people is they go from a specialist to a generalist. Okay. When I started, my first company was a service company. And so I had to learn about uh, people and sales and negotiating contracts. Then I got into the oil business per se. And I had to learn about engineering. I had to learn about operations, how to operate a well. I had to learn about how to manage a crew of people that and get along with people that may not only have a PhD, but may not have a high school education. I had to be able to, trust is kind of a word I really like because in the oil business, okay, I'm sitting in Houston. They may be sitting in some small town in Louisiana or some small town in South Texas. And if something happens with a well, if a compressor goes out or the well stops pumping, okay, I have to be able to trust them to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning in the freezing rain and go out and fix that well and go out and return it to production. And so you have to be able to set up a corporate culture in which people feel good about doing that. They feel that they're contributing to the company as much as the management does. And I never took a class in that. I took all kinds of classes in geology. I took all kinds of classes in geophysics. I even took a few math and physics classes. Uh, but I had to learn really how to work with people on the fly.
Do you think that when we teach geology in the universities, since only very few of the students that are going to become professors and many others they become employees or employers, do you think that is uh, good to explain also how to deal with people, how to study the market, doing the basic of business?
Oh, absolutely. Uh, I think business courses. I mean, I spent 8.5 years in geologic research, and I really felt that I was an expert in sedimentology, stratigraphy, seismic analysis, seismic stratigraphy. I won 5 best paper awards. But I actually knew very little about the oil business itself. I knew very little about money. Uh, all of those kinds of things became very important. Uh, as you start building a business, especially a business that's a capital intensive business like the oil and gas business. Okay, you have to understand debt. You have to deal with financial institutions. And I can remember spending 10 hours straight reading a loan agreement contract from Wells Fargo. It's 120 pages of legalese. You have to understand what they're going to ask for, what you can get, what you can't get, what terms are conditions. You have to understand uh, what your cash flow is at all times. Uh, and again, none of that is taught in the university. I think the best thing for a lot of students to do is to seek internships. It's really a win-win. We get relatively cheap labor, although it's probably more than any summer job would pay, and they get an education that they really, most professors are not equipped to give.
Jory, what do you miss about your more naive years when you were a youngster and and dreaming about your companies?
Well, in 1997, I got a large contract from Mobil, now ExxonMobil. And before 1997, I was pretty much, working out of my house. I had a couple other people working with me, but I was a small business. And I was able to maintain what I would call a state-of-the-art ability in research science. I remember thinking very clearly, if I take that contract, I'll lose that edge. And that's precisely what happened. I'm not actively publishing. I'm not state of the art. I'm not a state of the art research scientist anymore. The science has gone on without me. Now, do I have any regrets? Absolutely none, because I've been able to learn and experience and enjoy so many other things in my career. I've always enjoyed being on the high side of the learning curve. And so one of the things my career has done is allow me, every time I start a new company, I've learned something new. But you can't keep learning new things and still maintain, that absolute edge on the older stuff.
So tell us more about what you like about the oil business.
Well, you get to see if you're right. Okay, I think it's very exciting. Basically, when I was a researcher, I would study rocks, and I'd write a paper, and I'd say, well, 200 million years ago, these things happened. Well, I wasn't around 200 million years ago, so that was kind of my best guess. But when you drill a well, okay, you're saying, okay, I think there's going to be oil here. And either yourself or somebody else is betting $1 million that you're right. Think about that. That's pretty exciting. My first job in the oil business was right after I graduated college, and I was a well site geologist, which meant I actually lived on the well, while it was being drilled. And my job was basically kind of a safety engineer. If the well started producing lots of gas, okay, I was instructed to basically tell them to shut down operations and initiate safety procedures while I called up the main office. Now, this is in the days before cell phones. So calling up the main office often meant driving 50 miles into town, 3 o'clock in the morning, finding a payphone, making sure I had enough quarters, calling the office and making a decision, then driving 50 miles back. But that was pretty exciting for at that time, 21-year-old kid to be able to shut down, make those kinds of decisions on a major operation like that. I don't think there's any other discipline where you get that level of responsibility that quickly.
Talking about money, what is the meaning of money for you? What is the intrinsic meaning of having money, becoming rich, investing money? What is the value of money?
Well, that's not quite a question I expect. Basically, money. Well, first off, money is a belief system. Money's not real. That's one of the most important concepts that you have to get when you start in business. Only time money becomes real is when you actually take it out to use it. So if you buy a house for $200,000, live in it for 10 years, and now the house is worth $400,000, okay, it's only worth $400,000 if you sell it. Okay, otherwise, it's kind of worth something nebulous. Conversely, it could be worth $400,000. If we go into a deep depression with this COVID virus, might be worth $200,000 again. Nothing's changed. You're still living in the same house. Your payments are still the same. The house it hasn't changed a bit. Only the perceived value of the house. And that's one of the concepts that you have to get across when you think about money.
What is your idea? What would you like to do with it? What is your long-term idea of that, of this nebulous theme that is money, that doesn't exist until you cash it out, until you have it in your hands, until you do something with it?
Well, I mean, A, enjoy it, and B, pass it on to my children. And C, I give money to multiple institutions. Uh, you know, a lot of my money goes back and goes to educational institutions. I've got a fund that I've set up at Ohio State University to encourage actually travel to oil and gas related conventions. So a couple of years ago, I had 35 students go to the American Association of Petroleum Geologists Convention on my nickel. And that's again part of giving back, that I want to encourage, education in a profession that's been very good to me, to the next generation.
Well, thank you for what you do. And why do you where, why do you say that you want to give back? Where does it come from, this idea of giving back?
That's an interesting question. I'm not exactly sure. I think that everybody who's had success in their career, and clearly had success in my career, uh, gets to a point where they want to pass that success, or help inspire the next generation such that they can achieve similar success. Uh, for me, the oil and gas business has been a great run. I've enjoyed that. I still enjoy research geology. I still read many periodicals, and I would like to encourage people your age and younger to have that same kind of same kind of fulfilling, fantastic career that I've had. And so if I can help people do that, then that's fun for me.
Jory, don't you think that lately there is in the air the idea that the oil and gas business is a dying industry?
Uh, that's certainly in the air. And, with oil at $24 a barrel, uh, you know, uh, there's certainly a lot of people who think that. But one of the things to keep in mind is, and again, this gets back to kind of what the main core discussion is, it's fossil fuels are going to be around for a long time. Okay,
Why do you say that?
okay. If there's a couple reasons. Okay, one is it's simply, we have to understand the amount of energy that we use every day. I'll give you an example. Okay, the little light bulb that's above my head puts out 14 watt hours of energy. How much energy do you think every American man, woman, and child uses in a single year?
Well, I know that we use around like 30 kilowatts hour a day per person.
The answer is over 100 million watt hours per year. Every person in the world uses 20 million watt hours of energy a year. And the question becomes, why is that number so big? Reason that number is so big is that energy is in everything we do. And we don't often think about that. For example, we think about the energy we use to drive our car because we go to the gas station and we pump gas and we have to pay for that. We think about the energy we use to heat and cool our house because we get a bill. But we don't think about the energy used to build the car. We don't think about the energy used to build the house. We don't think about the energy used to maintain the road that we drive on. In fact, I'll give you a couple examples. Okay. Food for the average family of four for a week takes the energy equivalent 22 gallons of gasoline. Most all your readers or listeners own a pair of blue jeans. that pair of blue jeans will take the energy equivalent of 3 gallons of gasoline to manufacture, transport, sell, uh, wash, maintain, etc. And so if energy isn't everything we do, well, the cost of energy isn't everything we do. Cost it, and that kind of gets to the key point of my topic. And that is, the cost of energy. Most decisions made worldwide in energy are made based on cost. And
But
increases in the cost of energy affect the poor the hardest.
this is how do you because the first question was, why do you say that oil and gas is going to be present for a long time and is not a dying industry? I understand that energy is in everything, and that everything costs, but this doesn't justify the fact that that energy is going to be produced by fossil fuels rather than other sources of energy.
Okay, well, let's take a look where we're at now. Right now, 86% of all the energy in the world comes from fossil fuels. 4% comes from wind and solar. Right now, wind and solar have huge issues with scaling. I actually asked the question, how big would a solar plant have to be to power Houston? Now, the world's largest solar plant is, or excuse me, the nation's largest solar plant is in Ivanpah, California, in the Mojave Desert. It's 3,600 acres. It provides energy to 141,000 households. So I said, okay, Greater Houston has about 2.13 million households. Solar energy is less, so I take that into account. And residential use is only 38% of total energy usage for a major metropolitan area. So the answer is, in order to power Houston, you need a solar facility that's 403 square miles. Now, for people that want to visualize that, basically draw a line around Beltway 8. That's how big the solar plant has to be. Okay, so the question becomes, where are we going to put it? Let's look at wind. Okay, Texas has, I don't have to go to California because 25%, all the wind energy in the United States comes from Texas. There's a reason, and that is there are areas in Texas that are hot, flat, and windy. They're also empty. Well, if you look at the Buffalo Gap Wind Farm, which is one of the largest wind farms in Texas, it is 69,000 acres, and it provides energy on average to about 58,000 households. Okay. Well, that's over an acre per person, or excuse me, over an acre per household. So the question becomes, how can we scale it? Now in Texas, we've got lots of wide open empty spaces. Where these wind farms are located, these are entire counties that have a population of less than 10,000. But what happens when we move out east? Where are we going to put these things? Now, it's easy to say, well, we can put them in residential areas, but the problem is that an average wind turbine blowing full blast puts out 110 decibels. And World Health Organization has documented health issues associated with people who live near wind farms because of the noise. So there are really limits on scaling these energy sources. The other thing is the cost. Okay, I looked at what it would cost to get 50% of my power from solar energy, by putting basically solar panels on my roof. And what I did is I assumed, I use 50% because I don't have a big enough roof for 100%. Basically, my bill is right around $325 a month for electricity. Obviously, it's higher in the summer than in the winter. Okay, my average bill for with 50% of my power coming from uh, solar power, assuming I took a loan out to pay for the solar panels, would be $383 a month. Okay, that's quite a bit more expensive. Now, can I afford to pay that? Yes, but most people can't. Most of your listeners could not afford to pay that. In a study done by Yale, okay, there are lots of polls out there that suggest that there's very strong support for clean energy, and there is. We all support it. But when you ask the question, what would you pay? Study done by Yale, only 14% said they would pay more than $10 a month. Mine is $70. My cost would be $70 a month more. And so if you're asking people to greatly increase their cost of energy, which is a huge expense for most families, uh, to move to move away from cheap gas, you're going to find a lot of resistance.
Yeah, I see your points, Jory, and certainly the very first one that you start with about land use is certainly a clear, tangible problem. Uh, but that doesn't mean that can be done. Places would be found to create energy with solar or wind, specifically with solar, which seems to have more future than wind. Then you mentioned noise. It is clear that noise is another form of pollution, but also a, a rig that is drilling produce the same amount of noise, or the hydrofracking and the several tens of trucks that they are creating that power to do the fracture also are very noisy. The most important point, as usual, is when you touch the wallet of the people. So when you talk about cost. So cost is something that you, your point, and tell me if I understood bad. Your point is the cost of renewables is too high, and that is why oil and gas is going to remain in here, because people want energy to be cheaper. So I have 2 points in here for you. First, the cost of solar, mainly solar, is the main renewable for the future, has come down uh, for 15% per year since the 90s. Is a very typical, amazing trend, and then it grew 50% per year since the 90s. So it is true that it represents only 6-8%, but every year it grows up considerably. So this is the very first thing about cost. The second one is the so-called experience curve. It is clear that if there is no momentum on this new kind of industry, that I talk about the renewables, but it would be the same for cell phones, LED lights, semiconductors, or solar panels. If there is no momentum, then there is no cost improvement. The faster the rate of cost improvement, the more rapid the growth of output of an industry. So these two things they could counterbalance the easy topic of cost. When you put in front to a person two products and one is cheaper, generally you choose the cheaper. But as soon as the costs come down, and then there's competition, then also the polls that you mentioned, they will probably change.
Well, let's talk about a couple issues. Okay, first off, you don't usually drill oil wells in and around municipalities. Okay, and if you drill a well and frack a well, you have noise for a short time, and then you have no noise. Okay, wind turbines operate all the time, so they have to be located away from large population centers. Okay, that's number one. You're always going to have that noise. Now let's talk about solar panels. Okay, they have come down quite substantially in cost, but the reduction is not linear as you suggest. What you saw was a huge reduction in cost from the 90s till about 2012 through 2014. Okay, and that was largely a function of China subsidizing solar panel construction in order to take over the market, which they've done. 64% of all solar panels are manufactured in China. Okay, and they've commoditized it. But the cost, but then once that happened, you'll see that costs are beginning to level off quite a bit. And you can't bring the cost down to zero. It still somebody still has to make a somebody still has to mine the materials, fashion the solar panel, okay, manufacture it, ship it to the US, and somebody has to sell the panel, and somebody has to install it. Okay, so right now we're right very close to an irreducible cost standpoint. I mean, I did that exercise in 2012, and you're right. At that point, the cost was was almost double. Now, one of the important things to keep in mind here is that it's not U.S. anthropogenic warming. It's not anthropogenic U.S. warming. It's anthropogenic global warming. Right now, China has 993 gigawatts of power capacity using coal. Over 50% of all coal used to generate energy is consumed by China. China is building another 237 gigawatts of additional capacity. That's more than the total coal power we use. Now, when you build a power plant, you don't build it for a year or two. Power plants have a 50, 60-year life. Why is China doing this? Because coal is cheap. You'll hear a lot of PR about them moving to solar, and they're making a lot of solar panels. Most of those are for export. If you look at who's putting out carbon, you can see that our carbon emissions have remained relatively stable since 1980, and they've actually declined 14% since 2005. However, all emissions have risen by 23% since 2005. Nearly all of that emissions increase is in China. Now let's talk about India. India, in the year 2000, 2/3 of the people in India were without electricity. And India set up this plan to basically electrify the country. And it's been an amazing success. Right now, in a country of 1.25 billion people, there are only 31 million homes without electricity. It's an amazing accomplishment. And guess what? Per capita GDP has tripled in that time. The advantages of cheap energy that we take for granted are now being enjoyed by hundreds of millions, billions of Indian citizens. How are they doing it? India's energy is coming 72% from coal. Now, Modi, the premier, was asked if he plans to switch to more distributed forms. And he was pretty upfront, said, India's a poor country, and we're concentrating on improving our electricity infrastructure. It means both these countries have made a long-term commitment to fossil fuels. And in this case, quite frankly, coal. Okay? So to assume that and even Bernie Sanders made the point, he said, well, we only are 15% of the problem. Actually, we're 13%. But, we got to do something about these other 85%. Well, what are we going to do? Are we going to go to war with China and India? No. China's going to continue to dominate making solar panels, but there is no economic incentive for them to switch to a more expensive energy source. China's major competitive advantage is cheap labor. Our major competitive advantage is cheap energy. If we switch to a more expensive energy source and China doesn't, that's good news for China manufacturing, China trading, China products. And I can tell you that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders agree on exactly one thing. I'm pretty sure it's the only thing, and that is that China is an economic adversary. So we have to, again, we can't simply separate out ourselves from the world economy. Okay, we have to, if we're going to look at anthropogenic global warming, we have to look at it globally. And we have to come up with solutions that not only affect that we can initiate in the Western world that are to some extent exportable. Now, let me tell you about one of those solutions. If you look at our energy consumption from about 1950 to 1980, okay, and you can see that it was on a pretty steady rise. However, if we look, it starts leveling off our energy consumption right around 1980. Now, our GDP keeps increasing. Why is that? Energy efficiency. We become far more efficient. The light bulb that I told you that puts out 14 watt hours, well, 10 years ago, that light bulb would have put out 100 watt hours. Okay. The air conditioner in my house uses probably 2/3 of the energy that the last air conditioner I had. I have windows that block out far more solar radiation than the windows that came originally with the house. We can, that's if you want to reduce carbon emissions, you have to understand that every erg of energy not used is that many fewer carbon molecules in the air. And there's a whole bunch of things we can do to increase energy efficiency. And at that, and we're doing, of course, at that time, we're also decreasing costs. Because, if I go from 100 watt hours to 14, obviously I'm paying less money. I think the real danger is that we do things that actually damage our economy. And I'll give you an example. Germany was the poster child for reducing their carbon signature till about 2016, actually about 2014. Then they did three things: outlawed hydraulic fracturing, they started decommissioning nuclear power plants, and they made a huge investment in wind. Well, most people would think that their carbon emissions continue to decline. They didn't. They leveled off, and in recent years, they've been rising. The reason they've been rising is because the wind doesn't blow all the time. And so in order to meet the energy base load, they've increased use of coal. And people don't want to have blackouts. In Massachusetts, right, or let's use New York. New York has refused to allow pipelines to go from California to cities of New York to transport natural gas. Therefore, the utility said, well, we can't hook people up because we can't guarantee supply. Well, the governor said, well, you have to hook people up anyway. Well, what's happened is that the pipeline companies plan to transport that gas by truck. Well, it takes a lot more energy to transport a relatively small amount of gas by truck. And you're putting a lot more carbon in the air by all that big fleet of trucks to transport that energy than you would if you transport it by pipeline. Also more dangerous, and it also greatly increases costs. In Pennsylvania, average cost for electricity is about 10 to 12 cents per kilowatt hour. In New York, it's about 24 cents per kilowatt hour, more than double. Who does that cost hurt? It costs the poor. You have to heat your house in the winter, no matter how wealthy or how poor you are. Massachusetts will not allow pipelines either. So what they're doing is, first off, there are many houses they're heating with fuel oil. Fuel oil puts out about 30% more carbon in the atmosphere than natural gas. It also costs about 3 times as much to heat the average house for a winter. Now, Massachusetts is getting natural gas. They're importing it from Russia and from Yemen instead of getting it from nearby Pennsylvania. Now, obviously, it doesn't take a mathematician to realize that you're putting a lot of carbon in the atmosphere when you're transporting gas from Yemen to ports in Massachusetts. Let's look at the final thing. Okay, what would happen if we banned hydraulic fracturing in the United States? If we banned hydraulic fracturing in the United States today, tomorrow everybody would still get in their cars and drive to work. If we banned hydraulic fracturing in the United States today, tomorrow everybody would still heat their houses in winter and cool them in the summer. If IT was a country, it would use more electricity than any other country than China or the United States. But if we ban hydraulic fracturing tomorrow, everybody's still going to use their cell phones. They're still going to get on Facebook and Instagram. They're still going to use their computers for work. So the result is our electricity usage won't change. So where is that extra electricity going to come from? It's going to have to come from coal. It's the only other alternative we have in the near term. And that's going to greatly increase carbon emissions. It's the absolute worst thing we could do for the environment.
Jory, do I understand well that you say that if we transition too soon to renewables, we are going to do a thing that is going to damage our economy? And when you say our economy, you mean the economy of the United States. Is that true?
I would say it'll not only damage our economy, it'll also damage our environment. Okay,
so
it'll result.
What do you mean by damaging our economy? We are right now in March 2020. We're in a situation where we are dealing with the coronavirus, and we have to take some decisions that clearly damage the economy, because the priority is something else than economy. What do you think about taking a similar choice, making a similar choice for the environment?
Well, okay, here's the key. The coronavirus hopefully is short term. Hopefully we'll get back, be able to get back to our jobs, get back to having the economy running. If not, yeah, there will be a huge amount of damage. Okay, but by trying to transition to fossil fuels too soon, first off, India and China won't do it, so it won't make much difference. Okay, that's number one. But number two is that, yes, will not only damage our, will make energy more expensive. And making energy more expensive will affect the price of everything that we produce, of every service that we provide. And making energy more expensive will affect the poor the hardest. Now, we can provide programs, okay, to help people on a temporary basis, but we can't provide programs on a long-term basis. I mean, the COVID virus, I think everybody agrees, Republican, Democrat, that we need to get aid to workers who are very highly impacted. So we can keep it on a short term. On a long-term basis, we have to have solutions that work for the economy, as well as work the environment.
What is, Jory, the solution that you propose to?
Okay, well,
yeah,
that's a very good question. Okay.
So the question is, what is the solution that you propose to reduce the carbon footprint?
Yeah, okay. We have to acknowledge that there are bridge fuels, and those bridge fuels are natural gas and nuclear power. If you're not serious about nuclear power, you are not serious about anthropogenic global warming. Nuclear power, basically, in a little tiny rock, you've got enough power to power a small city. Nuclear power produces no pollution of any sort other than heat. And it's a high density energy source. Now, there's no question, A, that there are countries that we don't want to have nuclear power. But let's take a look at France. France is France gets
Why,
75.
why, why, why do you say that? Why do you say there are some countries you don't want to have nuclear power?
Well, because obviously the ability to develop nuclear weapons.
Well,
I
but
think
like United States has already nuclear weapons.
well, I know, but the United States, France, Germany, even Russia, we're not really worried about them being. They're not a rogue state. There are rogue states out there, and that play by different rules. So, but let's take a look at France. I want to. I think France will be the first country to generate all their electricity with zero carbon emissions. Right now, only about 6% of electricity in France is developed using natural gas or coal. 75.6% is developed using nuclear power. The rest is hydroelectric and a very small amount of solar and wind. France is also the largest energy exporter in the world. Now, when you talk about nuclear power, there's one issue that always comes up, and that's storage. France has solved the storage problem. They have facilities that exist in perpetuity, and basically, if you go to one of these facilities, you'll see there's this kind of large warehouse floor. And you'll see along the floor there are these little kind of circular vaults, and each vault has a spent fuel rod. France also recycles 96% of the fissionable material. So they reuse almost all of their fissionable material. And as a result, like I say, they will be zero carbon. They'll be the first major country to do it. And they're doing it while exporting large amounts of electricity. In fact, the only reason Germany isn't going up faster in carbon emissions is because Germany used to be an exporter of electricity. Now they're an importer, and guess who they're importing it from? They're importing electricity from France. We could do that same thing here. Okay, our nuclear plants on average are well over 40 years, and we're decommissioning them. 3 Mile Island was decommissioned last year. Indian Point plant, which provides 12% of the power of New York State, will be decommissioned this year. And we're not building new ones to replace them. There have been a couple additions to plants, but there have been no new plants built since the late 70s.
So this is the very first topic for the solution, nuclear energy. What
Yes,
else?
natural gas. Natural gas produces 58% of the carbon emissions that coal does. Okay, and we have a large, easily available infrastructure. Our emissions, carbon emissions, have gone down by 14% since 2005, and that's almost all due to the switch from coal to natural gas. Our coal usage has gone down by about 1/3.
Is there anything else in the mix that you suggest beyond nuclear
Yeah,
and natural gas?
carbon capture. Go down to LaPorte. There's a plant producing 50 megawatts of power. It's actually a prototype that is using a very unique way of developing electricity. It's called Allam Center Technology, ALLAM. What they're doing, okay, we've always known how to capture carbon at the smokestack. The problem with capturing carbon at the smokestack is it's just not cost effective. It more than doubles the cost of electricity. Well, what they're doing is they're actually capturing the carbon in the initial stages, and they're actually using oxygen to create a supercritical liquid. This may get out of the CO2. Now let me back up. all power plants work the same way. They basically use heat, either produced by natural gas, steam, or natural gas, coal, or nuclear power to produce steam. And then they use the steam to drive the turbines. And the turbines are what generate electricity. The Alma Center technology does is something different. They actually burn the CO2 at a high temperature, and they use the CO2 itself to run the turbines. Now, what's highly interesting about this is the average power plant works at about a 42 to 47% efficiency. That's largely a function of thermodynamics. There's very little we can do about that. Energy is lost through heat. But because the supercritical CO2 is a better medium to drive the turbines than steam, we're seeing 62% efficiency.
Assuming that nuclear is neutral with regards to CO2, which I'm not sure about it, assuming that,
It is.
do you think that carbon capture is enough to counterbalance the emissions made by natural gas?
Okay, it's going to be a process. There's no easy answers here. And if there's one message that I could get through to everybody, it is that there's no easy message here. Okay, Scott Tinker has a really good analogy, talks about the 3 E's. Okay, energy, environment, and the economy. And they're all linked. We can't change one without changing the other. So it's going to be a process. Can carbon capture, can we introduce enough carbon capture and enough new nuclear plants to counterbalance the CO2 emitted by natural gas? Not right away, but we're starting to do that now, and we need to continue to do that. Okay, along with increasing use of solar and wind. It's not an either or approach. The foundational fuels, i.e. coal and oil, are decreasing. They'll continue to decrease in the developed world. They're increasing in the developing world and in Asia to a large extent. There's very little we can do about that, and there's very little we're going to be able to do about that. Like I say, we're not going to war with China or India. Okay, so however, if we can develop right now the carbon capture technology using the Alma Center is profitable only because we're actually able to sell that carbon, that CO2 to oil and gas companies for enhanced oil recovery. So it's not applicable everywhere on a cost basis yet, but it is right now cost effective with wind and solar. If we can scale up the technology, if we can improve the technology, then that's something we can begin to export to other countries. Again, if it provides a competitive advantage without the cost, people will adopt it. But it's not something that's going to happen right away. And I think that's the important thing. I think that everybody has to realize we're not going to go to 98% carbon-free energy in the world in 30 years or in 20 years. It's just not going to happen. And so we have to look a little long term, and we have to think about ways to mitigate CO2 emissions.
Thank you very much, Jory. We were in conversation with Jory Pacht, CEO of Strandline Energy. Since 1992, he founded 6 oil and gas companies. He has been talking about which realistic solution to reduce the CO2 footprint. And correct me if I'm wrong, in a nutshell, you, Jory, you're proposing to use nuclear, go back to nuclear, use more natural gas instead of coal, and counterbalance the CO2 emissions from natural gas with carbon capture, along with a slow but gradual increase of solar and wind in order to have a balance in between a healthy economy, save the environment, and maintain the right amount of energy with these 10 billion people that we are going to soon be in this planet.
You summarized it quite correctly. I'll make one other comment, and I want to come back to energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is something everybody can do. Okay, you don't have to cool your house to 72. You can cool it to 78. You know, it's easy to have a bad guy out there, and the bad guys generally the oil companies say those people need to do this. But if we're really serious about mitigating CO2, everybody has to contribute. And it's really not that hard to live in a household in Houston in the summer at 78 degrees, or to live in a household in Houston in winter at 70 degrees.
Thank you very much, Jory. This was another episode of Mini Geology radio show at KPFT HD2 channel. And if you want to listen to the interview with Jory, you can go to minigeology.com, which is a YouTube channel. You can write me at minigeology@gmail.com. And you can also propose new people to interview, topics, or criticizing the program, and give me feedback. So thank you very much, Jory. I leave you the very last minute so that you can say the things that you didn't have time to say during this long hour interview.
Well, you know, as I pointed out, there are think of a Venn diagram with three circles. One circle is energy, one circle is the economy, and one circle is the environment. And they're interlinked. Now, most of my friends are probably lean more towards the energy side of the equation. Most of the listeners here lean more towards the environmental side of the equation. And right now, we're pretty much yelling and screaming at each other. Now, yelling and screaming at each other may be very therapeutic. It may make you feel good, but it doesn't solve the problem. And if we really, truly want to solve issues of anthropogenic global warming, and we really, truly want to take care of the less fortunate among us, those who can't pay for the increased costs of it, then we all have to come together and think about solutions that may involve some compromises, but are solutions that we can actually initiate and accomplish.
Jory, a very last question. What do you do as a CEO of an important oil and gas company in order to reduce the CO2 footprint?
Well, first off, we watch emissions, and a lot of this is actually quite well regulated. We watch emissions on all of our oil and gas equipment. Okay, people are worried about methane. Well, so are we, because every molecule of methane that escapes is that much less money we make. I mean, we sell that. So what we do is we go through and we put in mercaptan at the wellhead. Now, people may not want mercaptan is what makes gas smell the way it is. And so if we smell a leak, we immediately go down to fix it. And of course, that accomplishes two things. One, it benefits the environment, but it also makes us more money. So I think that we are aligned in more ways, oil and gas people and environmentalists, than those on either side would like to think. And I think it's a shame that we're yelling and screaming at each other when we really should be working with one another.
Well, I'm glad that we didn't yell at each other, and we were very civil during this conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you, Jory. Thank you very much.
Thank you.